Hello. So, our next guest speaker will give us a talk about understanding identity and access management for IoT. He is an identity and access management expert and particularly leads the governance of it in one of the leading Dutch banks. He has a decade of experience in cybersecurity. If he's not working, he loves to spend time with his family or go for a run. Please allow me to welcome Mr. Singh, who is Chief Information Security Officer at ABN Amro. Over to you, Vikas.
Thank you so much. So I hope my voice is audible, right?
Yes, yes, you are audible completely.
Okay, and you can see my screen as well because I
Uh,
can't see my screen.
no, no, not as of now.
Okay, just confirm me when you can see my
Yep,
screen.
sure, sure.
Great, right?
Yep, yep,
Lovely.
yes.
Welcome and thanks for joining this session, guys. My name is Vikash Singh, and today I'll be giving a presentation on understanding identity and access management in the world of IoT. Um, okay, so let's start. I am having troubles with my screen. Okay, so let me introduce myself as to who I am. So my name is Vikash, as mentioned, and I am I'm working in ABN Amro, which is a Dutch bank, and my current role is that I am the identity and access governance lead in that bank. So I have a decade of experience in cybersecurity, and predominantly my focus has been identity and access management. So I have done multiple roles, development, architecture, leading big programs, and as of now, my focus has turned into a bit of IoT as well because the world is moving towards that. So let's talk about Internet of Things. But if you see the screen, it's Internet of Confusion. And why I say so? Because it's very important for an organization to understand exactly that what we consider Internet of Things within that organization. Because because as a consultant, when I spoke to my clients, I got different reactions from them. I remember conversations when somebody told me that Internet of Things is not something which is new. We have this, pretty much we had the same technology earlier, but walking through your door using a smart card is not Internet of Things. Yeah, of course, it's automated. It makes our life easier. It is a security control. Yeah, in terms of like all the security experts, they know it. The physical boundaries, but it's not Internet of Things because it it performs an action perfectly, but based on your when you feed an action, it performs a reaction perfectly, which is like opening the door and you moving through it. What exactly then Internet of Things are? So for me, is like I consider like few principles which makes it easier for me to say, okay, whether it's an Internet of Things or not. Your watch, it's a wearable, it's not an Internet of Things. Your phone is a smart device, it's not Internet of Things. But Internet of Things is an ecosystem of connected devices, sensors, actuators, which feeds on data and produces smart results. It does not it is not waiting for your action to take a to perform any task. It has an intelligence of its own based on which it can perform a task. It can take take its own decisions based on a rule set, and it grows in time in terms of intelligence. That basically is an Internet of Things. Okay, so let's talk about security. And when I say security in terms of, INA security, but before that, we need to kind of see what exactly, how would you measure the risk level of those devices, so the properties of IoT devices, and based on the risk level, you basically add the security, so the properties which basically I look into is the security posture of the device, where it's manufactured, what kind of security controls are embedded by default in that device, what kind of connectivity it demands, the relationship of that device with your organization or with the user, of your organization. What is the appearance of that device? Is like, it's movable, immovable, tangible, and one very important point is who is having the accountability for that device, who is having the ownership for that device. Your life cycle management, how do you onboard, offboard that device? How do you make sure that you delete the data from that device? What is the emergency control in case, that device is lost or stolen? What are the decision making capability of that device? Because as mentioned earlier, that a, an Internet of Things device, they have their intelligence of their own. you know the other property is what is the purpose of that device, what exactly that device does, what will be the input you feed into that device, and what exactly the output you get, whether that is confidential information, whether that is private information, what are the rules, when you engage in that kind of data input and output. So these all properties, they basically gives you a very good guidance on determining the risk level of those devices, and based on the risk level you can take a very informed decision on what kind of security you want to give to that device, because we all know security is expensive, right? So it's not like you want to make all your devices super secure. I would not recommend that. Let's talk about the IoT security, but before, and I will only be touching on the IAM side of it. So there are a few IAM principles, and IAM is identity and access management principles. First and foremost, a very important is like point is onboarding of that device, and for that you would require an identity of that device. That any device which you onboard or introduce into your landscape, into your organizational landscape, must have a digital identity. And that digital identity should be unique and should not change within its lifetime. You know, for you should do a thorough risk assessment whenever you are onboarding a device into your organization. That's very important. You should have a you should have a very strong procurement process for the device. Any access that device has to the data of your organization should be vetted properly with proper authentication, with proper authorization. Appropriate logging and monitoring should be in place for those devices. You need to keep on searching for any shadow IT. And shadow IT is like, that you should be informed about any IoT device which is running within your organization. Most of the times we think that, okay, we have a very proper onboarding procedure, so nothing will slip. But if you're a big organization, you will not be surprised that there will be certain devices that is not accounted for. So it's important that you keep on searching for those devices. You know, the privacy regulations around those devices should be followed properly, should be taken into account before you do anything with that device. And that also adds to the risk level of the device. Appropriate network controls should be in place, whether you decide to have your IoT devices in a separate network or within the same network, but in a segmented area. So that's on you. But these are the principles which you should not, miss. Now, I talked about the principles, but let's start with identity. So in identity and access management, the pillars are identity, your access, and your governance, compliance, and liability. So within identity, so as earlier told, that every IoT device must have a unique identity of its own. There has to be a legal owner, a human who is accountable for an IoT device. We must have heard and read in the newspapers about a Tesla car, which was, where a pedestrian was hit by that car. And that car was on autopilot. So a discussion kind of popped up that now who is liable for that fault, because the car was in autopilot mode. But that case was solved because of course the person who was sitting in the car, he was liable, because you always have an agreement that you will always look into, you will take care of the road, whether the car is in autopilot or not. You will be alert. But for any other device, IoT device, there has to be a legal owner for that device to own the accountability. The metadata, like all the data for that device, needs to be properly documented. The purpose, the actions of those device, the manufacturing of that device, all the data related to that device. We call it the metadata. It needs to be documented properly. Let's talk about identity lifecycle. So how should you onboard a device within your ecosystem? What happens if anything changes within that device? What are the procedures you should follow for offboarding a device? You should always register your device in a centrally managed, database, so that, and of course, give it a unique identity. You should risk assess it. You should check the sensitivity of the data which that device is going to process. For offboarding of that device, you should make sure that at the end of the life cycle of that device, that you deregister that device with that associated identity. You take care of the data retention of that device. You take care of the data deletion of that device. You take care of a proper procedure that you offboard that device from your organization. There has to be an emergency offboarding available for that device as well, in case a device is lost, stolen, or unaccounted for. So that's very important. Now, authentication. So to access any information within your organization, you want your device to be properly authenticated using proper authentication mechanisms. And what would we call proper authentication mechanisms? Your credentials, your certificates, your keys, your secrets, which basically that device is using. So you need to make sure that your secrets, your certificates, they are managed, they're stored properly, they are transmitted properly whenever you are authenticating. There are few things which you always overlook, and we always read those in the newspapers, that okay, the password was admin. You should never have default passwords when in your IoT devices, because that's pretty common. But I think it's an awareness thing. We all read that never have default passwords. So you should always change your default password, never use it. There's also a risk, with authentication, that sometimes when your IoT device restarts, it goes back to the default settings. So you should make sure that you should not run it on the default settings. The other important thing is, you know, certain IoT devices, they're shipped with embedded security controls. You should always leverage those controls if your organization allows it to you to do it. And one important thing, that MFA is not always possible on an IoT device, because for MFA you need an action to be performed. So it should be mitigated with a proper authentication mechanism, or a stronger authentication mechanism. If the action performed by the device is privileged, or it is accessing certain sensitive information. Access management. This is pretty important, because always talk about, okay, but I am authenticated, but that's fine that the device is authenticated, but does that device has proper access to perform important tasks, or to perform privileged tasks, to perform sensitive or to access sensitive information? So that is based on your access model. What is your access matrix? That device, at what condition, at what circumstance that device can access the particular information which you are needing. Um, at what access level that device can process that information. Is it that it needs to it needs to perform a stronger authentication to do that, to gain that access, because that's what we call the privilege access rights. So these are very important things. You should not, it should not be that you just have one role in your access model and you just give it to those devices. And they have everything, they can access everything within your organization. Whether you are a small organization or a big organization, you should always treat these devices as you treat your users. Now, the role-based access control is pretty much strong in case of, say, a workforce user, or we're talking about our customer identities. But at the same time, we should also focus on a very strong access model for IoT devices. To start with, you should always stick to the least privilege. I think this is one of the golden rules, which I always say, that never provide m- you know um, more than needed access to anyone or anything. So it should always be a principle of least privilege. Now, the most important thing, the governance, the compliance, and the liability. So we talked about authentication, we talked about the life cycle management of those devices. We talked about your authentication mechanism, your authorization mechanism. But if everything is fine, but what about the constant governance around your devices? How do you know that you're still following the proper mechanism? So we need to perform access review of those devices, whether your IoT device has proper access, at all the time. It's not like that while onboarding and offboarding, you just have stronger controls in place. Your controls should be in place, throughout its lifetime. So you need to perform access reviews, and they are mandatory as well, in case of human users, in case of customer identities. So it should also be mandatory for the identity of things, Internet of Things devices within your organization. So that becomes pretty important. Your liability, like the ownership, which I talked about, the example which I gave, right? That who is liable when a Tesla hits, or when a car on autopilot hits a pedestrian? So who takes that liability? And for that, clear rules of engagement on the ownership of those devices should be put in place. So if anything goes wrong, who is liable? the compliance of those devices are pretty important. So you need to make sure that you have proper corrective, detective controls in place. You need to make sure that the logging and monitoring is in place. You need to make sure that the compliance around your IoT devices are always green. So these are a little, and these are basic things which you can do. I am not going into too detailed and too depth of these topics, but if we follow these basic principles, and to be honest, is like this is not hard. It's common. It's pretty common if you are in identity and access field to follow it. It's just like you need to make a start. So anyways, I talked about the logging and monitoring. About you need one very important thing. You need to make sure that you don't log the PII data into it. But that's also something which is true for your user identities and customer identities, or any data which you're talking about, which you're logging. So, and yeah, but here it's logging and monitoring, but it should also be alerting, that you should also have proper alerting in place on if you see that the devices are breaking certain rules, it should alert. At last, I would say that it's not, if it will come, but when it will come within your organization. Because we are already seeing that on a personal level we all are affected by it. You have Alexa for businesses, you have Alexa at your home, you have Google, you have Siri, and you have connected home systems, you have your Ring doorbell. So everything is kind of connected nowadays. So I would say plan ahead and be prepared, when it comes knocking on your door. So at least you can follow these, basic guidelines to start the discussion within your organization. So with this, I end my presentation. So yeah, if anyone can help me with any questions, so I can answer them.
Yeah, we have two questions over here. First one is how will one balance security needs with usability?
Yeah, that's a very good question, I would say. And my answer to that question is like it differs case by case. So you need to do an analysis, you need to kind of, uh, see within your organization, because too much security is also not good security, because at the end of the day you need to see that security is a business enabler for your organization. The purpose with which you're using it, you want to help your users, you want to help your business, so you don't want to put in too much security for that. So I would say a proper understanding of the purpose, of the use case, and then coming up with a balanced security is always like the way. It should not be that, okay, I have these top 10 security principles in my list and I want them all to be used in that IoT device. No, it should not be like that. If you see that, certain things are not right for your organization to use, it's okay to skip. But it's about that conversation. It's about that balance.
Okay. Another question is what non-information technology departments and systems need to work with identity management system? For example, our HR, physical security, finance, etc.
I would say the most important department is procurement.
Okay.
It's a non technology department, but at the same time, now it's not entirely a non-technology department, because they need to have a bit of technology background, but it's your procurement, because anything which, any device, any physical object which you get into your organization, it comes through procurement. So they should have a pretty good idea about, your guidelines, about your policies, about your controls for those devices.
Okay. Yeah, that's all from the Q&A. Thank you so much, Vikas, for such a great insight in understanding how identity and access management for IoT works. And that will be all. And we will be moving to our next session now.
Thank you, guys.
Goodbye. Yep.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.